different. Now that you have a grasp of compression, you kind of get an idea what some of these controls are, even if they're not ones you're familiar with. And then this one here, this looks pretty common to me. You know, you've got attack, release, your ratio, wet and dry, makeup gain, and then what is it? I got a high pass filter over here, and then whether you have an auto release or a manual release, all very familiar. This is one of my favorite ones, the soft tube FET compressor, even though it looks like the front of a 70s stereo. If you ever had a stereo back in the 70s, you know you probably had one like this. I know I had a stereo that looked kind of like this. Now, one thing, I think I said this before, one thing that you won't find on this particular compressor, where's the threshold? I don't see a threshold here at all. There's basically two different ways you can set the threshold. You can either bring, let's imagine the top part of this compressor. This is how great the graphics are going to be on this particular slide. Imagine the top of here is the threshold. You can either drag that down so that whatever your program is will hit that threshold, or you can drive that input up into the threshold. So this is a fixed threshold compressor. You see this quite often. If you don't see a threshold setting on a compressor, it's a fixed threshold, and typically there will be an input setting there where you drive your input hotter and hotter until it hits that threshold, and then you'll start to see that gain reduction. We saw that before. You have your ratio, attack, release, your output, your parallel processing right here, your gain reduction, all of that kind of stuff. In the detection side of the circuit, we can have the amount of the external sidechain. We haven't kind of seen that before. Normally it's just kind of an on or off. Looks like you can balance that in terms of the sidechain. And then on that sidechain, in that detector circuit, you can roll off some of the low cut and the high cut. This is really useful if the program that's coming in may be really bass heavy and you want it to ignore some of that stuff. You could roll that off to maybe to 200 or 400 hertz, something like that. And so it will ignore that. Same thing, you can roll off the top end. The look ahead, we haven't seen that before. Back in the old days, in the analog times, somebody had the bright idea about how about if we could look ahead at seeing, you know, just a few milliseconds, what is coming down the pike so that we could anticipate some of these big spikes. Now, obviously, you can't look into the future, so what they would do is they would delay the signal and look at that signal and then be able to kind of see what's kind of in the future, if you know what I mean. The downside of that is the output of the compressor was always delayed a few milliseconds. In terms of if this is looking at a signal that's coming from a DAW, like a recording, I mean, it's very easy to look forward to that because you're playing back a file. Anyway, that's what it's doing over here. So you can look ahead and look for certain peaks that will be able to kind of give you an idea, give the compressor an idea of what's coming down the pike. So there you have it. You now know what compression, limiting, and gates are all in a nutshell, what all of the controls are and how to use them, even how to route them in the standard and also some very non-standard ways as well. So now that we have a kind of a head knowledge of all this stuff, I'm going to round out this course by going one by one through all sorts of sound sources and scenarios. And you'll basically look over my shoulder as we use these dynamic effect processes. So I really hope you've learned a lot about compression, limiters, and gates so that you can use them in pretty much any scenario, you know, hardware or software on a Mac or a PC or any other device that comes out in the future. I really don't know what we're going to be recording on in 10 years from town, but I guarantee you this, you'll be able to operate any dynamic effect no matter what it looks like, because we really, you know, have those fundamentals down cold. So let's finish out this training by looking at dynamic effect processes in action.